Aircraft disappearing while attempting to intercept a UFO has been a recurring theme in alien movies since their inception, unbeknownst to some. However, there is a very well-documented real-life account of exactly this scenario. It would come to be known as the Kinross Incident, named after the now-defunct Kinross Air Force Base in Upper Michigan, where the event took place shortly after sunset on November 23, 1953. First Lieutenant Felix Eugene Moncla was called upon to intercept an unidentified radar blip, which is flying over Lake Superior near the city of Sault Ste. Marie in Michigan. Radar operators from the base witnessed an unusual object which suddenly appeared on their radar, prompting them to dispatch the skilled Air Force pilot. Moncla would take off in pursuit of the craft, flying in an F-89C Scorpion, the fighter jet. He was accompanied by Second Lieutenant Robert L. Wilson, who served as a radar operator of Moncla's jet. For some reason, it appeared that the closer Moncla got to the unidentified craft, the more difficulty Wilson would experience trying to maintain coverage of it on the Scorpion's radar, as if the object was somehow jamming the onboard system. This forced them to rely on the guidance of ground radar operators to keep them flying in the direction of the object. At approximately 8,000 feet and a speed nearing 500 miles per hour, it seemed Moncla and Wilson were about to contact the unidentified craft. It was around 7 p.m. as the ground crew nervously watched the jet radar blip closing in on the object, expecting Moncla to report back what it was any moment. Unfortunately, this is not what would happen. The ground crew witnessed the blip of Moncla's jet get closer and closer to the unidentified blip on the radar. He approached the object until they were almost touching the screen. Strangely enough, the two blips seemed to merge into one, and Moncla's jet disappeared altogether. At first, it was assumed the jet was perhaps flying over or under the object, but it never reappeared. Seconds later, the unidentified object finished off the screen just as suddenly as it emerged. It did not get out of the radar's range. It just disappeared from 1 second to the next. Ground control was baffled and could not understand what was happening. They repeatedly attempted to contact Moncla Wilson, but it seemed they lost communication. This scene was already bizarre, to say the least, but it would only get stranger from there. Following numerous unsuccessful attempts to reach Moncla, a lieutenant named William Mingenbach and a radar operator were dispatched to locate him. Robert Wilson said they were airborne by 7:15 p.m. and quickly approached where communications were lost. Along the way, Mingenbach's radar operator continuously attempted to contact Moncla by radio. Despite this, he never heard anything back, nor did he pick up any sign of Moncla's jet on the radar system. This would change at 7:35. However, when Mingenbach and his radar operator would receive a brief radio transmission, they could distinctly hear Moncla with his thick southern accent saying, "I think we better," followed by several other words they could not completely make out before the transmission went silent. Mingenbach believed that Moncla was talking to Wilson. However, this transmission was not meant for them. In the minutes following, they tried desperately to re-establish contact with Moncla through that radio frequency, but were unsuccessful. This transmission was bizarre because it occurred at 7:35, over half an hour after the ground control crew lost track of Moncla and Wilson. At first, it was assumed that their jet had perhaps crashed into the unidentified object, and that's why contact was lost. But how is it possible that Moncla's voice was heard for a significant amount of time after the fact? Furthermore, why did Moncla sound so calm during the transmission? Mingenbach claimed he sounded on edge, but nothing out of the ordinary. If Moncla and Wilson had indeed crashed, they surely would have been making frantic mayday calls and asking for assistance. The fact that Moncla didn't seem to be distressed does not make sense in the scenario. Also, if Moncla's jet crashed the moment he disappeared off the radar, he obviously would not have had the means to contact anyone via radio. So, where could this transmission have even come from anyway? These questions prompted an intensive search of Lake Superior and its shoreline. Over the next 5 days, no sign of Moncla, Wilson, or their jet was ever discovered. It's perplexing that nothing was found because the ground crew knew exactly where contact with Moncla was lost. A high-speed jet crash would have produced a significant amount of debris. The fact that there were no remnants of the jet anywhere in the surrounding area further suggests that they couldn't have crashed. But if this wasn't the case, what did happen to Felix Moncla and Robert Wilson that night? 1. Interesting. The detail in the case was the radar disturbance experienced by Robert Wilson while trying to follow the object. Mingenbach and his radar operator experienced no such disturbance, even though they were flying in the same airspace, meaning an external factor, such as weather, could not have caused it. It also could not have been Wilson's onboard radar system malfunctioned, as it was thoroughly checked before takeoff. This suggests that the unidentified object was trying to jam their signal. This also suggests it must have been equipped with significantly advanced technology to do so, meaning it could not have been a civilian plane or just a radar anomaly. Another interesting aspect of the case was the numerous contradictions in the reports of what happened that night. An official United States Air Force investigation concluded that Moncla's jet was sent to assist a Canadian C-47 Skytrain, which had veered off course inadvertently. It was alleged that this aircraft was the unidentified blip that suddenly appeared on the radar in a later phone interview. However, USF Public Information Officer Lieutenant Robert C. White would claim that it was a Canadian DC-3 flying over Lake Superior at night. These two models are somewhat similar, so his statement was overlooked by many. The problem, however, is that the Air Force keeps meticulous records of every craft they have in the air and their route. It's rather bizarre that White would change his story later on, especially considering he was involved in making the initial report where it was stated that the craft was a C-47. White would state that Flight Officer Gerald Forsberg piloted this craft. He claimed Forsberg's DC-3 showed up as unknown on the radar because he was 30 miles off his intended track. In a later interview for a documentary called Moncla's Memories, he was responsible for the mysterious blip. However, Forsberg denied this and stated he was nowhere near where Moncla and Wilson disappeared that night. He further claimed that he could never have mistakenly been even a few miles off course, let alone 30. High-ranking Royal Canadian Air Force officials would also remain adamant that they had no aircraft in that airspace at the time of the incident. White's explanation doesn't explain why nothing of Moncla, Wilson, or their jet was ever discovered. This unexplainable nature of the case and the numerous contradictions from the United States Air Force led many to speculate that the official report was merely a cover-up. Felix Moncla's cousin Buddy Moncla also held this belief. Buddy heard rumors in town that the official story was fabricated, and he spoke to many of Moncla's associates who agreed with these rumors. When asked plainly if they believed his cousin encountered a UFO during an interview, he answered, quote, "There are no questions about what else, and no one can prove otherwise. In a case as bizarre as this one, it does seem like this is the only logical conclusion, especially when you consider the seemingly impossible aspects of it. There was never a concrete explanation offered as to how Moncla's jet merged with the other object, where he and Wilson could be, or why their remains were never discovered, despite a massive search of over 10,000 square miles. On top of this, the U.S. Air Force was highly secretive and apprehensive regarding inquiries into the incident. To many, this alone was a telltale sign of something bigger underneath the surface. Moncla's older sister, Leonie Shannon, suspected a cover-up as well. She was adamant that the United States Air Force knew more than they were letting on when interviewed by a reporter several years after the incident. She said, quote, "We still don't know anything. I don't think the government wants to let us know what happened to him." Later, in the same interview, when Leone was asked if she believes a UFO or an unknown force could have been behind her brother's disappearance, she answered, quote, "I think something like that could have happened. However, it's still unclear what happened to Felix Eugene Moncla and Robert L. Wilson. That night, it seems that the consensus among family and friends was that the official report was simply a cover-up of something truly anomalous. The story from the U.S. Air Force about a Canadian aircraft being 30 miles off track and somehow appearing suddenly on Kinross Air Force Base radars is too far-fetched to be believed. Instead, many like Buddy and Leone speculated that Moncla was trailing a UFO that was trying to evade him by jamming his jet's radar. When Moncla continued his pursuit, the object captured his jet. This would explain why the two blips merged before Moncla's jet vanished. It could also explain how the unidentified blip disappeared from the radar so quickly, and why the government didn't want to reveal too many details regarding the incident. Unfortunately, this case presents a unique situation in which there is enough evidence to conclude that something out of the ordinary happened that night, but not enough to say exactly what it may have been that we may never know.